Hi everybody, welcome to Overtime. My name is Art Miles. Thanks for joining us once again. This week we will be interviewing our very first entertainment reporter at Fox 35 News. His name is Steve Oldfield. He is now a college professor. He is also a documentary filmmaker. But before he did all those things, he joined us at Fox 35 News. Here's Steve and I talking. Well, this is my first interview, which appears to be inside of an office. Hello, Steve. Where are you broadcasting from today?
I am broadcasting from Covington, Kentucky. It's a place called River Center. I also do documentaries, and I have an office in this building. And this is a conference room that I can use for interviews and just whenever I need it. So my office is right down the hall. And it's a mess. If anybody remembers what a slob I was at Fox 35, my office here is just as bad. So this is the clean conference room that I can show and look better.
Now that I think about it, they didn't give you an office at Fox 35, did they? Did you have a desk in the newsroom?
I had a cubicle, and my mate on one side was Ann Craig, and on the other side was Beth Sherman. But you may remember that was in the days of giant beta tapes, and every movie that I covered, I got these giant tapes. So I had stacks and stacks of tapes all over my desk in the cubicle, and it's a miracle that Beth didn't, kick me out and get really upset because my desk was truly the messiest it had ever been in my life.
I recall also that whenever your desk was at capacity, a lot of those beta tapes would show up on Tara's desk because they would arrive in the mail, I believe, and like, oh, here's a promo for this movie or for this event, and like those tapes would pile and pile up.
Oh yes.
So for those who don't know, Steve was one of our very first, I would say he's part of the original 5 or 6 reporters and anchors that arrived at Fox 35 WOFL in 1998. He was an entertainment reporter, and I have to admit, when I started working there a year later, I didn't realize that you were part of the original group because you weren't really in the office very much. You were always out on assignment.
It was really the best dream job you could ever imagine. I was on the road when I was in Orlando 45 weekends a year. Typically New York, Los Angeles, but I covered the premiere of Harry Potter in London. I went on the set of a movie in Prague. I was always on the road. That was, of course, pre 9/11. And it was much more fun to travel in 1998, 1999, 2000 than it was, of course, in 2001. So, and a lot of the traveling for entertainment reporters kind of stopped or was shortened after 2001. So it was incredible. In fact, I remember when I was leaving, Joanne, our anchor that we all love, coordinated a party for me. And the running joke was the party's on a Friday night. Usually Oldfield's on a plane Friday night. Is he even going to come to his own party? And that's the kind of world I lived in. And when I was at the station, I would typically work Monday through Thursday and be at the station till maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, editing stories to leave for the weekend so that I could then get on a 7 a.m. flight to Los Angeles, get back Sunday night, typically around midnight, and do it all over again the next week. But I never complained. I loved every minute of it.
So I suppose your office was actually at the Orlando International Airport.
Yes, very much so. It's the Crown Room, the Delta Crown Room. That was my second office.
So if you could take me back to 1998. The station's first show was March 1st, 1998, but there were, of course, the months leading up to that. What do you recall from that time when it comes to even finding out that there was a job opening in Orlando?
I was working at the Fox station in Salt Lake City and was ending a time there, knew I wasn't going to come back and we weren't going to renew a contract. So I was a little nervous and I thought, where am I going to work? When I saw Orlando, I thought, wow, what a cool place. And my sister lives in Florida. I spent many times there with relatives. I have relatives in Indian Harbor Beach and some in Daytona. So I thought this could be really cool. Plus it was a startup and that was exciting. And I sent a note out to, I guess, Bill Avery and said, hey, to me, Orlando is an entertainment market. It would be a great place to have an entertainment reporter. And much to my relief, he said, sounds cool to me. And I was flown down. And the thing about Bill that I thought was really interesting, This is pre MapQuest. It's pre Waze. There were no cell phones that had like GPS on them. So he basically said, here's the address of the station. Get yourself there.
Yeah, I can
So
see it from I-4, but that doesn't mean you're going to get into it easily.
yeah, exactly. So I had to, rent a car and find my way to Lake Mary, Florida. I'd been to Orlando and Disney and all those places many times. I had no idea where Lake Mary was. But luckily I got there in time, had an interview, and I remember Kate was there. Kate was his awesome assistant we all love. I think Tara might have even been there because she was, I think, one of the first hires. And it just felt right. If you've ever met Bill Avery, he's this I call him the Mother Teresa of news people, because he's incredibly good-hearted and a saint, right? And I left there thinking, what an amazing place, what a cool job offer. And it was also funny because I basically had a choice of start dates because they weren't going on the air till March. And I said, you know what, I'm going to spend Christmas with my family in Kentucky. I'll join you guys in January. And that's what I did. And in that time, we talk about a news team. That's kind of the term from the movie Anchorman
Yeah.
to everything, the news team. Fox 35 Orlando was the only place I worked that truly felt like a news team. And it was because we all came together those months before we went on the air. We were training together. We had a ping pong table and all of us played ping pong. We developed nicknames for each other. Mine was something that probably isn't politically correct anymore. But in
You were the Forrest Gump of ping pong players. I will say that.
pretty decent ping pong player. And my nickname, because of my style of playing, was Asian Oldfield, which probably isn't, like I said, politically correct in the year 2023. But back then it was kind of funny just because of my style of play. We had so much fun as a group. We were all about the same age. Bill was so good at combining a team. We would go to Disney together. Lance, our producer, was a Disney veteran. He had actually had an internship there, so he knew the way around the park. And we just had a blast getting ready to launch a newscast, is all I can say. It was the most fun I've had in my life.
So, based on what you're telling me, when you contacted Bill Avery, there wasn't actually a position for an entertainment reporter. They were just looking for reporters, and then you suggested this would be a great place for an entertainment reporter. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, and at the time I had been doing. I was called the Fox News Edge, which is a feed that goes out to all the stations. I was the reporter that my stories every week would go out on that feed. So they were airing in many markets around the country, and I said, "Look, I have these connections. I can bring you interview." At the time, the names that I think I probably would have dropped in '97 would be Bruce Willis or Russell Crowe or Julia Roberts. I said, "Look, here's my tape. Here's all and it physically was a tape back then. There were no links to send.
Oh, sure.
Right? Here's my demo tape with me interviewing Russell Crowe and Julia Roberts. How would you like to have that in Orlando? Plus covering all the theme parks." And you may remember one of the things that Lance produced for us that we did that was really cool when Islands of Adventure opened up at Universal Orlando. We had the exclusive. We did a half-hour special with the Don Holt and all the production people were a part of. We did all kinds of really cool entertainment stories, and but that was Bill Avery's vision to say, okay, let's have an entertainment reporter.
Oh, and I think back to that time when you were working with Skyline Productions with Don Holt and those guys. It's just like, what a great time. Orlando's still up and coming, Islands of Adventure, brand new TV station. It really, really was a great time to be in Central Florida for sure.
Better believe it. And what we could also do, because I had that great arm of Skyline Productions behind us, I wouldn't just do the 2-minute, movie story that would be on the news. We put together something called Fox Flicks, and Fox Flicks was a half-hour special. And we did an Oscar special, we did a holiday movie special, we did a on-the-scene location of a Bond movie, and in London, and got all these really cool interviews that turned into half-hour specials. We also did something called Fox Front Row, and at the time, Orlando had a sponsorship with the main theater in Orlando that showed all the touring productions. So Tara and I and Daryl, our photographer, we would go to the city before Orlando So maybe it was San Antonio, maybe it was Boston, Hershey, Pennsylvania. And we would interview the cast, get all the behind the scenes footage, and then put together a half-hour special. And then I would go opening night and stand on that beautiful stage in front of 3,000 people and say, watch our special, Fox Front Row. Please turn off your cell phones and enjoy the show and watch Fox 35.
That's
And
one of my first memories of me getting a chance to edit non-news for once, is that I think Mike Velocity and I got a chance to edit and put together your half-hour special when, I just blanked on it, Beauty and the Beast. When Beauty and the Beast came to town, I got to edit part of the half-hour special for that.
yeah, and I should say props to Mike Velocity and John DeMaio. Those were the other two people who were part of that team. That was great to have that team of people. And like I said, Tara, it was just so much fun.
So you come in to meet with Bill Avery, as we all had to do at one point. We all had to sit in his office. What was the time frame when that happened? Was that just 3-4 months before the first newscast? Or, was the building still under construction when you arrived?
I don't remember if the building was under construction, but they certainly hadn't done the set yet and gotten everything together for the news department yet. It was either late November or early December when I did the interview. And then we agreed that I would start in January. So there was this feeling of really being in on the ground floor of something. And not to sound corny, but that was really exciting. Every other station I'd worked at had been around for 30 or 40 years. I was joining a team that had been around. I was the new guy. Well, this was a chance to be part of a place where we were all new. We were all excited. We were all about the same age. And it was just such an incredible opportunity.
I think that's what I remember saying in David Martin's interview. There didn't feel like there was anybody above 30 years old when we all worked there. It's a very unique situation. Every other station in town, like you said, was already 35, 40 plus years old. It was something brand new. And I don't know if anybody today can even relate to a situation like that. Every TV station that's out right now is already up and established, including Fox 35 now. Nobody can ever... I don't know of anybody else that knows about a time when, hey, we're going to start a brand new news station and you get to be a part of that. What a fantastic time that was.
Well, and the bonding was so instantaneous because we were all sitting there learning how to use the cameras, learning how to use these really cool laptop editors, because remember back then that was the era of actually using videotape, right?
Those DVC Pro decks, yes, those little mini ones.
So we were all learning how to use all of that. We all learned how to use the computers together. It was, and at one point, I'm sure you're going to mention this because this is one of my favorite memories. We actually helped with the promos. They brought in a film crew, and we had as our launch cars Mustangs that I called the Speed Racer car. That was my nickname, the car that we had. And I'll never forget one evening, all of us showed up together and we each got in a car and we drove the cars, and the promo showed this line of all these really cool Mustangs parking. But we were actually part of building the promos for the news, and we were the stunt drivers. And never forget.
David and I did talk about that, and he is hunting down that footage because it was shot on film, which is very unique.
Oh, yeah. Big budget. Like, that was a really cool thing. And I remember, I think that's probably the only time in my broadcast news career where I heard the words action, right?
Roll film.
Clapboard and the whole bit. It was, I remember calling my family and saying, this is pretty big time. I'm in something really cool. And I was so excited.
I think my confusion about me not knowing that you were there from the beginning was also that there's something called a custom out tag when somebody does a package. If it's somebody from a different market, but then they still say the words Steve Oldfield, Fox 35 News. So I would hear that and say, oh, okay, this is the entertainment reporter. He gave us a custom out. Little did I realize, after being there for a month or so, I started in 99, about a year after the show launched. Suddenly you appeared one day in the edit bays, and I'm like, oh, I know who that is. I didn't realize at the time you actually worked there. This was your headquarters. I just assumed you worked in another city and you gave us a custom out queue on your packages when in fact you actually worked right there in Central Florida.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because when I would edit my stories to send to New York, I would do that. I would do a Fox 5, Fox 13, Fox, whatever the stations were. and then it's just a generic Steve Oldfield Fox News outcue. And depending on the market, sometimes they would call and say, "Can you give us a custom outcue?" Or I would just use the generic. But that's funny. That is, yeah, it was. I could really, be anywhere, and being in Orlando was the best as far as that goes.
And so at that time, you were living in Orlando, or you moved to Orlando to work at Fox 35 News. You traveled extensively. You said you began in January of that year. Did you hit any of the festivals in that first year that you recall? Did you get to go to Sundance that first year?
I'm guessing that I did, because the one thing about being in Salt Lake City is that I had incredible connections with Sundance, because it's, of course, in Utah. So I think I covered Sundance every year that I was in Orlando. I know one year I brought, oh gosh, what was his name? He was a great photographer, and we're friends on Facebook still. He came later. He had been in the Gainesville office, and we brought him over. But yeah, I mean,
yeah, I know who you're referring to. He worked at the Gainesville office for a very long time. Again, somebody will pop up on the comment section of this video and tell us who that was.
But yeah, so Sundance was part of it. I'm sure I covered the Toronto Film Festival that year, some major openings and premieres. And I, of course, vote for the Critics' Choice Awards, and those ceremonies I always attended too, representing Fox 35. And so yeah, it was a lot of running around. And the thing that I remember that was one of my most awkward moments at Fox 35, we talked about the opening of Islands of Adventure with Universal, which was great. There was another opening that happened during our tenure at the beginning of Fox 35, and it was very controversial at the time. It was the opening of Animal Kingdom at Disney. And we got a call from our Fox people in New York, and they said, "We're hearing that some animals are dying. We're hearing that it's kind of an awkward..." I guess somebody had backed over and run over a flamingo back then, and there were 6 or 7 animals that had problems. And to be fair to the Animal Kingdom people at Disney, when you're trying to launch a park like that with, dozens or hundreds of animals, that's to be expected. But they were getting some really bad press about it. And I was tasked, I think I went out with Daryl, and we went to Animal Kingdom. It hadn't really even opened yet, and we ended up on the safari ride, and we're jumping around. Yeah. And I had the handler, because Disney always gives you a handler when you go to the park. And in front of the handler, I had to do my stand-up on camera, and I said, just like this safari ride, it's been a rather bumpy start for Animal Kingdom. They've had to die. So you can imagine how she felt for the rest of the thing. But to her credit, she was incredibly polite. Very nice. But I had to sit there in front of a Disney person doing that. And then the other part of the story is we had been talking to this woman who'd been riding around in this safari vehicle. She was going to do that for her job. She'd been in that vehicle for about a month. Okay.
Oh.
And right on the dashboard, it said African wildlife. It looked like a guidebook. So I said, "Hey, Daryl, why don't you get a tight shot of that?" And I said to her, "Let's get a shot of you pulling this guidebook out of the dashboard and referring to it. That'll be some good video I can use in my story." She had no idea. When she went to pull out the guidebook, it was glued in. It was a prop. It wasn't a real book. So that became part of my story, which aired all over the country on the Fox feed. And they say that they want to be real, but the book isn't even a real guidebook. And I was a little afraid to go back to Disney for a while after that on the story, because there's a dartboard up there with my picture somewhere at Disney, because it was the most awkward story I've ever had to do. So that was my investigative hard news entertainment story for my tenure in Orlando.
I can imagine today, if that had happened, somebody would have created a Twitter page for that dead flamingo, and they would have been like, "Avenge me."
Oh yeah. And the video of her trying to get the book out of the dashboard was priceless. And that would have been a viral video. It's a different world now.
So there'd be many times when I'd be working at Fox 35. We'd have our day-to-day routines. We're doing our news and weather and traffic, and we get to do some sports. But then there'd be those days when Steve Oldfield would come in. and he'd get to tell us stories about who he met that day or who he sat down and interviewed. You always had great stories for us. It was weird that we would have a 30-minute show once a day. That's all we used to do. So you got to say some of that is weather, some of that is sports. So we really only got like 15 to 17 minutes of news. And then suddenly we get this big chunk of a 2.5, maybe sometimes 3-minute interview that Steve Oldfield would do with a one-on-one with a Hollywood reporter. For us, the editors, it was fantastic because you would take a big chunk out of the news from us editors, and we always really appreciated that.
I had no idea. That's so funny. Well, I remember, and Lance Grindle, who was the first producer, who we all loved. Like I said, Lance was our tour guide to everything Disney. He produced the Universal special. He did a lot of great stuff. He came to me that first week, Art, and he said, okay, so we don't have really much room for news. I think your stories are going to have to be about 1:05.
Oh, no.
Like, I can't do a celebrity interview in 1:05. And I was like, oh, my gosh. So for the first week or two, I think they were like 1:15, 1:30. And then they just kept creeping up. And luckily for me, Lance was a big movie person. So he wasn't really upset about it. But I'll never forget that initial meeting where they said, okay, all the packages are going to be about 1:05. And I was like, yeah, I don't think that's going to work for that.
There's no way that Steve Oldfield can do an interview with Matthew McConaughey and ask him one question and have that answer be under a minute long. So there's no way that's going to happen.
Exactly. Or somebody like Robin Williams, who, you basically sat down and he took off and was on a comedy routine. And who's going to cut Robin Williams, right? He's going to say, okay, here's Robin Williams. Okay, thanks, bye. We needed to hear.
And there was nothing at the time where it's like, well, we'll air this later on our morning show, or you can find this online on YouTube. We didn't have that. It was only that half hour of news, and we had to be very picky about what went on there, and it was probably heartbreaking to have to cut those things down.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of Matthew McConaughey, I love to bring this up because behind the scenes, there's a group of us that always loved to reference an interview you did with him. I can't remember the movie, if it was Sahara or something around that time period, where you got off and you started asking him questions about favorite foods or something. And you and he got off on this tangent about spicy pickles or something. And it became just something hilarious that we loved behind the scenes. Do you happen to recall that interview at all?
I am really embarrassed to tell you. I think it's from all of the flying, the 45 weeks of flying. I have really bad memory of stuff like that. I have no recollection of that. I'll tell you how bad it is. Years later, when I was in Orlando, I had interviewed Tom Selleck for a movie. And I met him socially at a friend's property that they were like neighbors to him. And it was this barn. And we were just sitting there. And he said, well, here's Tom Selleck. And I said, nice to meet you. He said, actually, you met me when you were a reporter in Orlando and you interviewed me for this movie. I had no memory of even meeting and interviewing Tom Selleck.
Wow.
So, and I read an article once that if you flew way too much, that some of your memory like that goes away. I can tell you the names of all my teachers when I was a kid. I have really great memory. During that time of all that flying, a lot of it is kind of hazy. So I vaguely remember something about Matthew McConaughey being a colorful person, but I don't remember the pickle story.
Oh my gosh, the guys backstage, the Darrens and Alwans and all of us behind the scenes, we're always laughing about spicy pickles. It was some sort of line, and then you'd have a great cutaway of you kind of like thumbs up with your reaction to his crazy comment about some of his favorite foods. Oh, that is so funny. And you know what? And to be fair to you, Tom Selleck probably had his mustache shaved off for when you interviewed him. That's a totally different person. That's two different people.
I think you're right. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I would yell that. The thing that's so frustrating to me, I'm sure a lot of our fellow people who started, was none of that stuff lives online, or if it does, very few of it does. And I had all those giant beta tapes, which I got rid of. So I don't know how good the archive is with all those old mini DVDs.
Yeah, the DVC tapes, the last time I was there, were still up on shelves, but none of that stuff has been archived. And there are paper books. Mike and I, at the end of each night would have to fill out, okay, this story is on this tape number. And when I visited a couple of years ago, those books were still there, but somebody needs to go back and archive about 1,000 DVC tapes. Each tape is an hour long, and your packages are on there. There's great old sports packages on there. Every package that anybody ever did is there. It's just, it unfortunately hasn't been archived yet.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah,
Wouldn't
your
that
stuff.
to do? Because yeah, that stuff is priceless, and I would love to see my conversation with Matthew. I will tell you that's one thing that I think we talked about, maybe you and I at one point, even in person back in the day. I would you only get like 5 or 7 minutes of an interview, and you know that they've been asked the same question about their character 35 times or whatever, right? When they do these interviews. So I would always try to find something a little different, like maybe the pickles, or who's
Right.
your favorite actor that you've ever worked with, or whatever the crazy question would be. And then I would build the whole story around that moment of interaction between the two of us. I was always looking for a time where they would say something, cut away to me, and I'd be laughing or smiling or saying something back, and then we would move on. And so sometimes it had nothing to do with what the movie was about, just because it had that good moment of interaction, and I wanted to get something memorable. That's what Bill Avery's thing to me was. He said, "Look, they can read the New York Times, they can read the Orlando Sentinel, they can find out what the movie's about. Tell them something different that they're not going to get anywhere else." That was the direction that I had,
I bet
and
and the actors probably appreciated that too, because as you said, there's just a constant rotation of every 5 or 10 minutes. Another person sits in the chair. Here comes the same question. Here comes the same question. And then you probably asked him something along the lines of craft services or what did you have to eat there, on the set or something like that. And that's something probably even McConaughey remembers.
yes, I would agree.
So when it came time to put your packages together, sometimes I'd see you editing at our station, but there'd be other times would you be editing off on a different location somewhere? Did you have one of those portable DVC laptops that you would keep with you?
I wish I would have, but it was awkward because we had the
There were-
portable tiny little DVC tapes, and at the time, all those celebrity interviews were on big old Beta SP tapes.
Oh,
The time that you didn't see me, I was actually back in the evening using the Skyline Productions room. They trained me on how to use, I guess it was called a Grass Valley switcher,
mm-hmm.
if memory serves me correctly. And I would sit in a room by the studio and edit from like typically 10 o'clock till 2 in the morning or something. And then I would have to dub it over from beta to mini DV for us. And then I would send that beta to New York to be aired around the country. And that was the other thing. You didn't send anything over the internet. There was no FileZilla. There was no FTP
Nope.
site. I had to physically go every couple days to the post office or use Federal Express and send New York a physical tape. And so yeah, but if I were editing in London, for instance, if I were on a shoot in London, sometimes I'd edit in London or New York or Los Angeles. But a lot of the times people didn't think I was in the building, but I was actually back in that Grass Valley, edit room, editing all my stuff there.
So you'd get a beta tape of a trailer from the movie or B-roll from the movie, but then you'd get another beta tape of here's your interview you just did with
Exactly.
the actors. So you're coming back with all your tapes. So now I have a memory of you back in that Grass Valley edit bay because we didn't always see you in the DVC edit bay where Mikey and I would sit to do the news. You had your own special edit bay as well.
Yeah. And I loved that because I could do, not that I did a lot of effects, but it was kind of cool. You could do dissolves and you could do stuff. And I was the kind of person, I could take 2 or 3 hours to edit a story. Whereas if I were in one of those DVC bays, people would be like, "Hey, I have
I
a
need
break.
to edit, yeah.
Are you out of here yet?" So nobody was really breathing down my neck to hurry up and edit. So that was kind of an advantage.
Now, when you finished your edit, we're getting very technical now. When you would finish your edit, would you then have to transfer it to DVC? Because we were using a system that only let us ingest DVC tapes for the news.
Yes, that was the next step. Is I had to go, and I forget the name of which number of bay it was, but I'd have to put it in and dub it over for you guys from beta to that DVC Pro.
So yeah, most of your things are probably on those DVC Pro tapes that are up on those shelves. And I would like to put on a little visitor pass and go to Fox 35 perhaps and start transferring those tapes over. But that could probably take an entire summer or probably a couple of months because there's a lot of tapes in there. But I bet we've got some real gems in there that we've all forgotten about.
You better believe it. And there were, I remember we covered some big fires right toward the beginning. There were national news, the opening of Animal Kingdom, the opening of Islands of Adventure. There were many cool things that happened. in those first couple of years.
Were you ever put in a situation like maybe during the brush fires where you were asked, or maybe not the brush fires, any other story where you were asked, hey, we need your help on this story. We've got a breaking news situation. Or were you
Yeah,
always kept in the entertainment side?
I actually did go out and get some video of the brush fires, and I remember that very clearly. And that was a little scary because we had made the decision to have those Mustangs, and trying to go off road in the Mustang was a little scary to me. I remember that thinking, "Oh no, I'm brand new on the job. I'm going to wreck the car." I was terrified of that.
This is something David and I also talked about in '98. Those were the wildfires, and luckily here in Central Florida, we haven't had a wildfire situation like that since then. But at the time, you guys were brand new, either almost on the air or still not on the air yet with the brush fire story, and you guys had to experience that as new employees at WOFL.
Yeah, it was really something. And I remember just the sheer and coming back, and the whole newsroom smelled like smoke because we had it all over our clothes. And I was like, wow, this is going to be really interesting. I never would have thought. I was prepared for maybe some hurricane weather, residual, hurricane effects in Orlando. I was not prepared for fires.
You were in a very unique situation there, and I always ask people that are in news kind of a where were you type situation when it comes to September 11th. And I know your story because I remember you telling it to me before. And at the time in New York, when you were to look out the window, it may have appeared like you were in a David Lynch film, when in fact you were actually interviewing him that day.
Yeah, I was at the Toronto Film Festival, and I had been asked. I used to do, being the syndicated person for Fox, and then I was the pool person for Disney. So, like, if they were only going to just do one interview, like for instance, when Michael J. Fox was going to do an interview for a movie, they weren't going to subject him to 30 interviews. So I was the person asked to do that.
Right.
Or for a movie called Mulholland Drive, which was a big David Lynch film it's the Toronto Film Festival, they said, David only wants to do one interview. Will you do it? And I said, sure. I was honored to be that person. And I had prepared. Normally with these interviews, if you're going to ask them what's your favorite, kind of pickle or something, normally you don't have to do much preparation. But because I was going to be, the generic interview, or like the pool interview, as we would call it, for David Lynch, I probably spent 3 or 4 hours preparing, looking things up, doing all these questions. I showed up early to the Four Seasons in Toronto, and that was around 9 o'clock on that Tuesday morning, to see everybody sitting there in shock. And I remember Naomi Watts was one of the stars, and Naomi and myself and her co-star, we sat on a bed in the hospitality suite for the movie, watching the tower fall. And we were just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this just happened. And David Lynch had big enough pull that they had a private plane for, I think it was Warner Brothers, and Naomi and the other star and he, raced to this private airport. They were one of the last planes allowed to take off before, as you may remember, everything was shut down for like
Right.
4 days. So I was stuck in Toronto, watching all of this unfold until Saturday. September 11th was on a Tuesday, and every day my flight would be canceled, and then I really didn't go on the air for about a month. After that, I went to Montana with a friend because at the time I was kind of living part-time in Hoboken, New Jersey. And my roommate, we had a place there that had a view of the World Trade Center when it had happened. So he lost 3 or 4 people that he knew very well. So we went to Montana and went hiking, and I went home to see my folks, and it was just a devastating time. But by then I had left Fox 35. So I wasn't, but I was still sending stories. I was still on the air there. That happened for a year or two after I'd left. That I was still, airing every night or whenever I would do an entertainment story. But I'll never forget how devastating that was to watch that, and then going back and, for months after, we would look out the window and see smoke rising. The smoke fires lasted months, so it was just terrible.
Was there ever a time when you were able to reconnect with David Lynch for another interview? Actually, I don't think he's done a major feature film since then.
No, that was my big chance, and I never got to do it. And yeah, I saw Naomi at an event years later, and we kind of talked a little bit about it, but I've never gotten to talk to David.
Ugh, a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
But uh, I'm actually surprised at all that he was going to do a sit down interview. That doesn't seem like something he would normally do.
Not at all. And I think it was because the film was at Toronto and he kind of had to be there for that. And I think he was just kind of excited about that. Maybe, I don't know. It's a good question. Like I said, he had only agreed to do one, and I was going to be that guy,
Mm.
only to have it not happen.
And you've had many, many famous interviews over the years. I've heard you come back and tell us, oh, I met with Julia Roberts this week and you were editing something together. And it's like you'd always have some cool stories to tell us about the famous people you met. After some time, well, no, wait, I don't want to say that yet. Back up a little bit. There was a time at Fox 35, as I said earlier, we only had a 30-minute show a day, which means we had ourselves a little free time in the afternoons. And we, in between construction and redoing the building for something, they had set aside a ping pong table, and it was even in the air conditioned part of the building, and it was considered for me one of the best times of my life to be able to work at a TV station and have the time to just play ping pong with my friends. But then Steve Oldfield comes in one day. He's got his own paddle with him. Of course, that's when you need to be aware that you're in trouble. And he would come in and devastate all of us.
I will say, I think I lost a couple times to Johnny Preston and to Bill Cook. But I think my overall record might have been like, we'll say, 70-4 or something.
That's a
I
good
don't remember.
number, yeah.
But no, I will tell you, I've worked at other TV stations after that. I currently teach at a college in addition to that. Um, as far as a team of people, that was my favorite group of people I've ever worked with in my life. And that ping pong was a big part of it. And what you may not know, Art, is that, I'm a tennis player too. I
Yes.
was on a high school team. I would have played college tennis, but I didn't end up doing that. I still compete in tennis today. Um, there were a group of us who all would get together and play tennis together. Bill Cook and I played, Johnny Preston and I played a lot of tennis. And yeah, we were always doing stuff outside of work together as well. It wasn't just we were there all day together, but then every weekend it's like, okay, what are we doing? Where are we going to go to Disney MGM? Where are we going to go? Where are we going to go to party and have fun? And there was a place, I believe it was called Have a Nice Day Cafe.
Hmm.
Yeah, and their logo was like a smiley face. Do you remember that place?
Yes.
We would go there. We would go to Fiddler's Green down in Winter Park, and I lived in Winter Park, so I could walk to Fiddler's Green. But it was the most social, the most supportive, the most fun. And I just the other day, Art, on Facebook, Louis
Yes.
Olivero. I
One of
used
our
to call,
first, he worked at the desk,
yeah, he was the assignment editor.
assignment editor.
What a cook. He was the most incredible guy, and he would have these football parties, and he would have all this food, and he still posts about it on Facebook, all the food that he has. And I told him, I said, well, the best party food I ever had in my life was at Lewis's house, right? So that was, and I will tell you, I'm not the kind of person that does that usually with people I work with. I'm usually like, I don't, you make an excuse. But with Fox 35, I lived for what's the next fun thing we're going to do as a group. And having Joanne as the anchor woman, she was so supportive. And she was a solo anchor back then. There
Yeah.
was no,
Oh yeah.
no male anchor. She did.
There was no room at the desk to sit a second person. She had to do the show by herself.
Totally, totally. But she was so supportive and loving and the greatest person that we all loved being around. And between she and Bill Avery and Lewis and Kate and David and the whole crowd, I mean, and Lance, they were all people. There was nobody you'd say, oh, that person's an asshole.
I think that credit goes to Bill Avery. Then, if there was a television award for casting, he definitely gets the award for best casting for 1998.
Oh, I totally agree. And I remember Janice and Donald, they were a husband and wife team. Scott, our awesome sports guy. I mean,
Scott Burridge.
was we were just all friends. Scott was the best tennis player of all of them. And I have to say, he was a heck of a ping pong player too. So I bet I lost some to him. Yeah, he was a great tennis player. And his son, I keep up with them on Facebook. His son was like a state finalist in tennis in Colorado where they live. So yeah, it was just, you're right. We were all young. We were all active. We all had fun. We wanted to party together and have a great time.
We were all going through the same thing, which was all working at a news TV station at the same time. But also, it was a small group. Most TV stations, I mean, the amount of employees they have, it's a huge number. But this was a very small group because it was only one show. So we
Right.
all kind of worked the same shifts. And so we all had the same time off together. We would take our long lunches together and have our long ping pong sessions together. But the fact that it was a small group, and it was the group that Bill Avery put together. It just was a team I wish could have lasted forever.
Well, the other thing that I remember, and you make a great point about it, usually in a newsroom, people are so under stressed to get everything done for the 4 o'clock show, the 5 o'clock show, the 6 o'clock show. We could come back from a shoot and sit at our desks and talk for a few minutes. And I remember Beth Sherman would hold court because she was
Oh,
really
yeah.
funny, right? And we would
Yes.
all sit down and talk at Beth Sherman's desk, or maybe we'd go over and talk to Joe. There was never this, I'm on deadline, don't talk to me. There was never anything like that.
Unfortunately, things like that did have to come to an end. A half-hour show turned into an hour, and then it turned into adding a 5 p.m. show, and then eventually a 6, and then a morning show, and then we became like all the other stations in town, and things start to change, and people start to go in different directions. After you left Fox 35, you still were doing some reporting for us, like you said. But what was the next big move for you? The best creative move for you
Well,
after leaving Fox?
you asked that, and I will again reveal something I haven't told anybody because this is fun to talk to you. I I got a call from somebody I had worked with in Denver who was running a really avant-garde, really cool thing, kind of like the Daily Show in Miami. Whammy was the station,
Okay.
and they did an evening newscast that was anchored by a guy named Ben Mankiewicz, who does, I think it's Turner Classic Movies. His brother is on Dateline. Very high end. One of the producers was a guy named Jank, who ended up being one of the hosts of the Young Turks. Like, it was all really edgy, super smart people. And very much like the beginning of Fox 35 Orlando, it was one show, 30 minutes at night. It was this little team of people. And he said, "Will you come down here?" And I thought, oh, Miami's a big market, and the pay was going to be, crazy amounts of money compared to what I was making in Orlando. I didn't want to do it. And
Really?
Bill had left, and our new news director was a woman named Lena.
Hmm.
And I think Lena pretty much felt like that was a better career move for me. I think she thought I was comfortable in Orlando, and I needed to take this because it was a great opportunity or whatever. So I ended up taking it. But the entire 4 hours that I drove from Winter Park to Miami to start work, I cried for 4 straight hours. I was like, what have I done? I love all these people. I love Fox 35. I love Orlando. What have I done with my life?
Mhm.
And I'll never forget it. It was one of the most traumatic things. Leaving Fox 35 was like losing, your family in a car wreck or something. Like, it was just devastating to me. And I was there, and no one was very friendly at all. I can say this because Whammy isn't on the air anymore. But there were people, you would walk down the hall, and I would smile and say hi to like a sports guy or something. They would look right through you. They wouldn't even talk to you. Like, it was the exact opposite. It was everything that's wrong about TV news was this place in Whammy. That people were unfriendly. It was really snarky and snotty. And then Barry Diller, who owned it, sold it to, I think it was Telenoticias. And overnight, we all lost our jobs.
Oh.
And they had to buy out my contract, though. So I got to be, as they say, on the beach. But I hated Miami, too, compared to Orlando and Winter Park. So the moment that happened, I moved back to Kentucky, where my parents were at. My dad was sick at the time. He had Parkinson's disease. And for the next 4 or 5 years, I was still the network feed reporter. And I would send my stuff around, but I really didn't have a full-time job for quite a while. So I was devastated to leave Orlando. Miami, as I said, the station was sold and we were all kind of kicked out. And then I still did the movie stuff though, and finally decided I'm going to teach. So I taught 10 years in high school. And during that time, I was still doing some of the movie stuff. So like I was able to walk. You think that, like for you guys, for me to walk in and say, hey, I met Matthew McConaughey, you guys thought that was cool. Imagine walking into a high school and telling a bunch of your high school girl students, well, I'm going to go interview the cast of Twilight
Oh yeah,
this week.
you were the king there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can I go
So
with
what,
you? Can I go with you? I'll be your intern. I'll help you.
and what we did, those were when iPads had just come out. And we had the girls all ask one question to Robert and one question to Taylor. Um, and then I held up the iPad and they actually got to do the interview, through the iPad and that sort of thing. So that was really fun.
Oh, you were
And
the coolest teacher ever in their eyes, for sure.
they dug it, I will say. And
And
now I teach at a university, Thomas More University. And what will shock everyone there is actually I'm part of the rugby program there. I'm the academic coach for our rugby team, which is one of the top rugby teams, believe it or not, in the country. We're ranked top 4 in Division One, and we went to the national championship and all that stuff. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. I still am a member of the Critics' Choice Association. I still do occasional movie reviews, and I vote for the Critics' Choice Awards. But as far as my professional career, my favorite time was that time at Fox 35.
absolutely. And you carried that experience with you of interviewing all these people and learning about the behind the scenes. And just most recently, in the past year or two, you actually got into the business of making a documentary film. Tell us a little bit about that experience for you.
Well, I always say the Sundance Film Festival and the Toronto Film Festival and working at Fox 35, that was my film school. I was a journalism major. I didn't take any film classes, one, I think, in college. But I interviewed at Sundance every year. My niche was documentaries. Because, again, everybody's going to talk about the fact that Brad Pitt is at Sundance. How many people were actually going to interview, a woman who almost died from a surgery and mortgaged her parents' house so that she could tell the story of this medical crisis in her life? Or, I interviewed some people one time who, a guy named Arthur Dong. Arthur Dong did a movie called License to Kill. He was a gay man. He went in to interview guys who he went behind bars and interviewed inmates who had killed gay men around the country and did a whole documentary about that. And I was like, wow, that is really impressive. So I interviewed Michael Moore many times. So that was really my film school. And I decided I've done these 2 and 3 minute stories my whole life. Why not do a documentary? And the first one I did was on this place where I'm at right now, Covington, Kentucky. I got a master's degree in public history, which looks at, putting together documentaries and museum exhibits. And I did a documentary on the city of Covington, which was right across the river from Cincinnati. It was celebrating its bicentennial. And I basically put together a bunch of 2 and 3 minute packages and made a 90-minute documentary. And then while I was making that, I met a man named Jim Hall. Jim Hall was a painter, and he got a case of the shingles virus. It went in his eyes and it made him see everything in lines.
Oh.
So he started painting those lines, kind of like pointillism, but he called it linealism. I did a documentary on him that ended up in festivals all over the country and including Canada. And then most recently, I directed Rush to Judgment. That, again, had Covington roots. You may remember there was a kid named Nick Sandman who came in contact with a guy at the Lincoln Memorial during the March for Life. It was a Native American. He beat a drum in his face. Nick Sandman happened to be wearing a Make America Great hat on his head, and it went viral. It was a viral
He stood
story.
there and just smiled and didn't say anything, and then you kind of based a whole documentary on that whole situation.
Yes, because everybody interpreted that smile as a smirk, very different language. And he ended up suing and getting big settlements from CNN and the Washington Post. Some of the other lawsuits were thrown out, but they settled with him. I happen to know people at Covington Catholic, so that was my end. But I spent a year and a half, getting that all together and doing a documentary that ended up in festivals. And I have to say, had it not been for my time in Orlando and my time at Sundance, I never would have become a documentary filmmaker. And now I teach documentary film and film classes at Thomas More University. And so it's been very rewarding.
I love how you just I'm going to be back editing this. I love how you just brought that all back around for me. That was very nice how you circled right back to your time at Fox 35 in Orlando. That's wonderful. Tell us online, if it is available online, where we could find some of those films.
Oh, that's a good question. There's a website, rushtojudgmentdocumentary.com, and then there's a website called linesofsight.com. If you're one of our people, watching this who I used to work with, feel free to email me, and I'll send you a link, and you can screen it for free. And I'm happy to get your feedback and see what you thought, because you'll see a lot of TV news people in that, because TV news people were every bit as guilty as the Washington Post and other places when it came to covering Nick Sandmann.
You really got to be on both sides of that as somebody who's been on one side of the camera interviewing people, to now you're sort of on the other side, seeing a different side of things. And also you got to kind of go and do the film festival circuit, but in a different way totally this time.
That was, and that's so great that you brought that up, because I've now been interviewed and reviewed. And when I think back at the time, sometimes I could be a little snarky myself in my reviews, or I wasn't thinking about all the work that came to being in the movie. So thankfully, we received mostly really strong reviews for our film. But that's really terrifying, being on the other side, thinking, okay, what are they going to say? What are they going to ask me? And I much prefer asking the questions than answering them.
As somebody who now has been on both sides of things, if you were to meet a student, let's say, who was interested in getting into making a documentary film, what kind of advice do you think you'd have for them?
It's a very good question. I think part of it is just watching a ton of stuff first.
Yes.
That, again, not just the time at Sundance in Toronto, but going to the Florida Film Festival and going around and just seeing, that was in Maitland, I seem to remember. Just watching as many films as you can, and then starting to make films. And I really feel like being a reporter first and trying to do a good 2-minute story and doing that over and over and over and getting those skills down, that was incredibly helpful, because then when I had to do a 90-minute project or an hour-long project, it was easier because I'd already done all those little things on the way. So I think, spending a few years in television news can never hurt you. And I know people like, John DeMaio and
yes,
other people have, started in news, but then gone on to do great things in production. Mike Velocity did a lot of stuff. So I think I don't think you can go wrong learning the business through news first.
Yes, learn the business. See as many documentaries as you can. I remember being at college at UCF and seeing Harlan County, USA, or Brothers Keeper, and then years later, Hoop Dreams, and it's like these documentaries are they're life-changing.
Exactly.
So I have a separate question aside from everything, that is, I'm starting to build a music collection of all the interviews that I do. If you ever find yourself where you have some free time and you're relaxing in a hammock, what would you say are your 1 or 2 favorite songs you like to have as you're starting to doze off into the hammock? And then with the answer to this, I'm compiling a list that I'm going to send a link to. These are all the people that I interviewed, and these are their songs that help them to relax while they're sitting in the hammock.
When I walk every day, I listen to like super peppy stuff. Like I listen to Earth, Wind and Fire, and Michael Jackson, and like stuff to like get me moving. I'm type A. The thought of like, do I even have a song I relax to? I don't know. Think about that. I guess, okay. Before I ever came to Orlando, I was one of the people who interviewed the Dave Matthews Band before they were a signed band. That would have been back in probably 94, 95 there. And so Ants Marching, which is a Dave Matthews song, is one of my all-time favorite songs. And he has another song called Crush. And I would say anything from early Dave Matthews and any James Taylor song. I love James Taylor, so I could easily see myself like relaxing to some cool James Taylor.
That's interesting, because you and David Martin both mentioned James Taylor and Earth, Wind, and Fire as in their choices. That's very
Wow.
interesting. We all think the same and act the same in the news business, perhaps, and we all relax the same with those artists. It's very interesting. Okay, I have one last question for you, Steve. Can you look back at anything in your life from when you were younger, perhaps in high school or even or younger, where you said to yourself, "Yeah, that when that happened, that's the reason why I became the person I am or got into the field that I am in today."
Well, it's interesting you say that. I actually have a prepared answer for that because I have a speech that I give to high school and college students where I mention this. Um, I grew up in a home of just four people in a time when there was only one television in the household. I had a sister 15 years older than I was. She thought I was the biggest pain in the butt, and she thought every night, okay, every night after we had dinner, we would walk from the kitchen to the living room to watch the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. And my sister thought when I was 3 and 4 years old, I was too young. I should go outside and play. I shouldn't sit there with the family and watch the news. That only made me want to watch the news even more. So from the time of the age of 3 and 4, I became a news junkie. I knew the names of every correspondent on CBS. I knew everything about that show. I had a cassette recorder that was before even VHS, and I would record parts of the news, and then I would cut out little articles from the paper, and we had a Brownie film camera, and I would make newscasts. And then at the age of 9, I was horrified because all of my favorite reporters were making fun of other 9-year-olds, asking them, "What is Watergate?" Because that was the time when Richard Nixon was about to, fall out of the presidency, and they wanted to know what kids thought about Watergate. Well, of course, I knew all about it because I watched the news every night. I was so embarrassed for my fellow 9-year-olds because one of them said, "Oh, that's the kind of gate that you use to put out fires. It has water on the gate, and that's how you put out a fire."
Well, he wasn't wrong, but it was pretty funny, though.
Somebody said it was a ride at Disney World, which was new at the time, right? They thought that was a new ride at Disney World, of Watergate. And I was so upset about that I wrote a speech for the 4-H speech contest called "What TV Tells Me." I was 9 years old. I said, I want to be a correspondent someday. And I won the state speech contest in Kentucky for that speech. And that said to me, maybe you could do this. Maybe you do have a career. And it was all because of Walter Cronkite and the CBS Evening News. And then years later, I was at Northwestern. I started Northwestern Student Television, which is still there. They call it Northwestern News now. And the dean asked me to go to the airport to pick up a speaker who was coming to campus, pick him up in a limousine, take him to school, said I could interview him for Northwestern Student Television. That guest was Walter Cronkite.
Oh, wow. So you got to sit in the limo with him?
Spent 45 minutes in the limo from O'Hare to Evanston, Illinois, talking about the business, talking about life. He had little hearing aids in both ears, so he kind of reminded me of my grandpa. He was a tennis player like I was. We had the awesome time. Then I interviewed him for Northwestern Student Television. That was one of my first ever interviews, and it was with Walter Cronkite, my idol I'd had since I was 3 and 1/2.
Oh.
So I was never nervous interviewing movie stars at Fox 35 because I had interviewed my idol at 19 at Northwestern, Walter Cronkite. It was all downhill after Walter Cronkite.
At that point, was he already retired from CBS Evening News?
He was retired, and he was on a college circuit. He was going around to schools speaking about the business and speaking about journalism. And I'll never forget that. But that was like, well, maybe I can do this for a living. I've met Walter Cronkite and interviewed him.
When at my school where I teach TV broadcasting at my middle school, my principal asked, we have an empty wall here and we'd like to put a mural up or some sort of picture. What do you think? It's next to my classroom. So we put up a huge mural of Walter Cronkite sitting at his desk in one of the hallways at my school. I feel the same way as you do about him.
Well, and a lot of people in Orlando will appreciate Walter Cronkite, of course, because he was so big on the space program. That he spent a lot of time in Orlando at Kennedy Space Center talking about those launches. And you may remember when we did that special on Armageddon, that's how we ended it, was with a shuttle launch behind me. I said, thanks for joining us on Fox Flicks, Fox 35. And then the shuttle, they did 3, 2, 1, and the shuttle took off behind me, and that was our closing credits. And one of the reasons why I had wanted to do that was because Walter Cronkite had done it in the 60s and 70s. And so that's so cool.
That's very cool. Well, Steve, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much for visiting with us and reminding all of us who worked there at one point what a wonderful place Fox 35 News was in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Any parting thoughts about your time with Bill Avery and your cast and crew that you worked with?
Well, and I will tell you, Bill, to me, I call him, like I said, the Mother Teresa of the news business. He is such an incredible human being. And I kind of decided to go back into TV and do a little bit of work in addition to teaching. And I was having some issues. Just last week, I called Bill Avery and we talked for the first time in years. It was like we hadn't missed a beat. And he gave me some really great advice on dealing with management, with what I'm currently doing with news. And I follow, half the people we work with. I see all the stuff that Beth Sherman does all the time, Joanne, a lot of the people there I keep track of. Thank the Lord for Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Really talk to Mike Velocity. I mean, I haven't kept up with hardly anybody anywhere else I've worked with. But, the team at Fox 35 means so much to me. Tara, I've watched her kids grow up through Facebook, right?
Yep.
Janice and Donald. I mean, all of these people are still in my life thanks to social media. Right. And I can't wait to reconnect in person. And I think we'll all agree that it's just the same. It feels just the same. It's truly the best group. And it was because of the people that Bill Avery brought together. It was just such a talented group, and David and everybody. You, John DeMaio, Mike Velocity. I mean, I could name everybody there. Alwan.
Oh yes.
Just people I loved, right?
And so far, everyone that you've named, I've either gotten in contact with or I will be getting in contact with soon for future interviews. Cool. I'll say this to my audience right now. Coming up in the next week or two, we do have an interview with Bill Avery. It has been confirmed, as well as Beth Sherman. And I have 2 or 3 others. Laura Stewart is also confirmed. And we're going to be conducting those interviews, and they'll be airing every Friday right here on my YouTube page. Well, Steve, thank you very much for visiting with us. I hope to, in the near future, to have one of these group WebExes where we can all get together at once and talk about things and tell different stories. So I hope you'd be available for that.
Oh, I would love to do it. That would be great.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Steve. That's very nice. Thanks to Steve Oldfield for visiting with me. If you go to the link at the bottom of the screen on our YouTube page, you will find the different links for the websites that Steve was talking about for the different films that he worked on. That's all for this week. Next week, we will be joined by our very first news director, Bill Avery. He's got a lot of great stories to tell, and we will see you next time. Thanks for the drone footage, Walter.